It was a crisp autumn afternoon when we arrived at the edge of Pine Hollow Forest, a vast wilderness known for its breathtaking beauty and eerie tales whispered among the townsfolk. My friends and I, Jake, Sam, and Lisa, had been planning this camping trip for weeks, eager to escape our hectic lives and immerse ourselves in nature. I was the reluctant one, my mind cluttered with the stories I'd heard over the years about the forest, particularly the mysterious disappearances of hikers who ventured too far into its depths. But the others were excited, dismissing my concerns as mere superstition. After a long drive filled with laughter and music, we parked our car at the edge of a narrow path that snaked its way into the trees, their leaves ablaze with hues of orange and gold. As we unloaded our gear, a chill seemed to creep through the air, a subtle reminder that nature could be both beautiful and foreboding. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows that danced along the forest floor, and I felt an inexplicable heaviness in my chest as we set off, our laughter echoing through the tall pines. We trekked deeper into the woods, the vibrant foliage slowly fading into a more muted palette of browns and grays, the sounds of the outside world fading with each step. After an hour of hiking, we found a secluded clearing where we decided to set up camp, a perfect spot framed by towering trees and a small, bubbling brook nearby. As we pitched our tents, I noticed the wind picking up, rustling the leaves and creating a haunting melody that echoed in the back of my mind. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. Once the tents were up, we gathered around a small fire, its flames flickering and crackling against the encroaching dusk. Jake, ever the jokester, pulled out a tattered book he had found in a thrift store the week before. "I thought we could read some spooky stories to set the mood," he said with a grin, flipping through the brittle pages. It was an old camping guide, filled with tips for surviving in the wild, but it quickly devolved into a collection of chilling tales about the forest. The further Jake read, the more uneasy I felt, particularly when he stumbled upon a chapter about a local legend known as the Whisperer. The book detailed the unsettling disappearances of campers over the years, each account punctuated with ominous rules about the woods. "If you hear your name being called from the forest, do not respond. It is not your friend calling," Jake read aloud, his voice taking on a mock-serious tone. The laughter around the fire died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence as the weight of the words hung in the air. "Come on, it's just a story," Sam scoffed, trying to lighten the mood. "We'll be fine, just a bunch of silly tales to scare the newbies." But as the darkness descended, a palpable tension settled over our camp. The firelight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced among the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around at my friends, each one absorbed in their thoughts, the camaraderie of the day slowly slipping away as the forest closed in around us. The chill in the air deepened, and I could hear the faint rustle of leaves as the wind picked up once more. But this time, it sounded different, almost like a whisper. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination, but the feeling persisted. After some time, we decided to turn in for the night. As I lay in my tent, the fabric pressed tightly against my body. The sounds of the forest enveloped me. I could hear the soft chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional crack of a twig breaking underfoot. I rolled over, trying to find comfort in the sleeping bag, but sleep eluded me as the unsettling whispers grew louder in my mind. The darkness felt thicker than usual, pressing in on me, and I listened intently for anything out of the ordinary. As the hours passed, the forest took on a life of its own. I could hear muffled sounds, like laughter echoing through the trees, interspersed with the gentle babbling of the brook. It was unsettling, yet I convinced myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by a strange sound, a faint rustling outside my tent. My heart raced as I lay still, straining to hear over the thumping of my pulse. I felt a sense of dread creeping in, and as I turned to the tent flap, I caught a glimpse of movement just beyond the trees, something dark and fleeting. I sat up, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. But deep down, I knew it felt wrong. The next morning, the sun peeked through the canopy, casting dappled light across our campsite. I emerged from my tent, attempting to shake off the lingering unease of the night. Jake and Sam were already at the fire, brewing coffee while Lisa rummaged through her bag. "Did you guys hear that noise last night?" I asked, my voice tinged with apprehension. It sounded like someone was outside. They exchanged glances, laughter echoing in the air as they brushed off my concerns. "Just the wind, man. You're overthinking it," Jake replied, tossing a log onto the fire. I wanted to believe him, but the sense of foreboding still clung to me like a wet blanket. As the day unfolded, we hiked further into the woods, the atmosphere shifting as we left the familiar behind. The trees grew denser, the sunlight dimmer, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. We came across a narrow path, partially hidden by thick underbrush. "Let's check this out," Sam said, eager for adventure. I hesitated, a sense of wrongness nagging at me, but the others urged me forward, and against my better judgment, I followed. The path twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the heart of the forest. The cheerful sounds of nature faded, replaced by an eerie silence that enveloped us. My unease intensified, the whispers from the night before echoing in my mind. Suddenly, we stumbled upon a clearing littered with old, weathered items, discarded camping gear, tattered clothing, and a rusty old compass. A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something that had long been forgotten. "Guys, this is kind of creepy," I said, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "Maybe we should head back." But the others were already combing through the remnants, fascinated by the stories they could conjure from the debris. As I stood there, unease swirling in my stomach, I heard it again, the soft whisper of my name carried on the wind. I froze, my heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Jake scoffed again, rolling his eyes. "It's just your imagination, man. Let's keep going." Against my instincts, I pressed on, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, the shadows of the trees shifting just out of my line of sight. We spent the rest of the day exploring, but my mind remained on high alert, the sense of danger lingering like a storm cloud overhead. As dusk approached, the forest took on a different demeanor. The air turned colder, and the shadows lengthened ominously. We decided to head back to camp, but the path we had followed seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the dense underbrush. My heart sank as we wandered aimlessly, the fading light casting strange shapes around us. "We must have taken a wrong turn," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "How did we get so lost?" The realization hit us all at once, the panic setting in. My mind raced as I replayed the warnings from the book. If you hear your name being called from the forest, do not respond. It is not your friend calling, but I couldn't voice my fears without sounding ridiculous. We wandered for what felt like hours, the trees closing in around us as darkness fell, leaving us disoriented and afraid. The whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent, wrapping around us like a shroud. "This isn't funny, guys. We really need to find our way back," I said, my voice rising in urgency. "Calm down, we'll find it," Jake reassured me, though I could see the worry in his eyes. But as the minutes turned into an hour and the night deepened, it became painfully clear that we were hopelessly lost. The forest felt alive, breathing around us, and the muffled sounds grew more pronounced. Then, without warning, I realized that Sam had gone silent. "Where's Sam?" I asked, scanning the darkness, a sense of dread washing over me. The three of us exchanged frantic glances, the realization sinking in. "I thought he was right behind us," Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Sam!" we called, our voices echoing in the night, but only silence answered. My heart raced as we backtracked, calling for him, but the woods swallowed our cries, and my mind began to spiral. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the whispers intensified, wrapping around me like a sinister melody. "We need to stick together," I urged, panic settling in as the darkness thickened. As the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of disembodied voices, a chill enveloped us, making my skin crawl. It felt as though the forest itself was closing in, the trees leaning closer, their branches clawing at the night sky. "Sam!" I shouted again, my voice trembling, but the only response was the rustling of leaves, as if the forest were mocking us. Each second stretched into an eternity, and the darkness seemed to breathe around us, heavy with a presence that I couldn't shake. Just then, I spotted something moving at the edge of my vision, shadows darting between the trees, slipping just out of reach whenever I turned to look. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing as I gestured toward the flickering shapes. Jake and Lisa's faces mirrored my fear, their eyes wide and frantic. "What the hell is happening?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing whispers that swirled around us. "It's just our imaginations," Jake insisted, though he was struggling to keep the tremor out of his voice. "We need to keep moving." But before we could decide where to go, I felt a rush of air sweep past us, cold and suffocating. It carried with it a faint whisper of my name, so soft yet undeniably distinct, sending shivers down my spine. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice rising as I turned, desperate to escape the tightening grip of the forest. "We need to find Sam." But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of dread settle deeper in my chest. I could sense it. Something was watching us, lurking just beyond the reach of our campfire's glow. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving through the trees like an unseen predator closing in. "We need to go back to camp," I urged, my instincts screaming that it was the only safe place we had left. "It's our best chance." We started retracing our steps, the darkness wrapping around us, making every shadow appear alive. The whispers morphed into a symphony of overlapping voices, each one more disconcerting than the last. I could hear bits of conversation, fragments of laughter, and eerie lullabies that sent icy fingers creeping up my spine. It was as though the forest itself was alive, echoing with the lost souls of those who had wandered too far and never returned. Then, in a moment of horrifying clarity, I realized that Lisa had fallen silent beside me. "Where's Lisa?" I gasped, the panic surging through me as I spun around. My heart dropped as I saw her figure momentarily illuminated by the dim light of the campfire, standing still at the edge of the clearing. "Lisa!" I shouted, but she didn't respond. She stood there, staring into the darkness with a blank expression as if entranced by something unseen. "Come on!" Jake yelled, grabbing my arm, pulling me away from her. But before we could get more than a few steps, Lisa suddenly turned her head slowly, her eyes wide and filled with a wild, terrified recognition. "You have to listen," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We can't leave her." I felt a rush of panic as she seemed to reach for something in the darkness, her fingers trembling, desperate. "What are you doing?" I cried, but the fear in her eyes spoke of something far beyond rationality. "You don't understand. She's here." In that moment, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows behind her, a darker shape that blended seamlessly with the surrounding trees. The air felt charged, oppressive, and I instinctively pulled Jake away as the whispers surged, now intertwining with sinister laughter that echoed through the trees. "We have to go!" I screamed, and just as I turned to run, I glanced back and saw Lisa's face change. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now sparkled with an unsettling calm, as if something had taken root within her. Without warning, she turned and ran deeper into the woods, disappearing into the night. "No, Lisa!" I shouted, but it was too late. She was gone, swallowed by the darkness. My heart raced as Jake and I stood frozen in shock, the weight of our friend's disappearance crashing down on us. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "We can't just leave her," I replied, my mind racing. But as I looked around, the realization hit me hard: we were lost. The path we had taken earlier seemed to have vanished completely, and the trees now loomed like ancient sentinels, blocking any chance of escape. "We can't go after her," Jake said, his voice shaking with fear. "We'll just end up like her." The whispers intensified, wrapping around us like a thick fog, and I felt the temperature drop, each breath a visible puff in the chilling air. "We need to stay together," I said, trying to remain rational despite the spiraling panic. "Let's head back to camp and regroup." With heavy hearts, we turned away from the direction Lisa had run, the darkness now feeling like a suffocating blanket. We hurried through the trees, each step crunching softly against the forest floor, but the whispering continued, weaving in and out of our conversations, tempting us to look back, to call for our friend. Just when we thought we had found our bearings, we stumbled upon the clearing again, only this time it felt different. The remnants of the old camping gear were gone, replaced by a thick fog that rolled in silently, obscuring our view. The familiar brook's gurgling had faded into an unsettling stillness, as if the forest held its breath, waiting. We need to go," I urged, a sense of dread crawling up my spine. As we turned to leave, a sudden rustle echoed from behind us, drawing our attention back toward the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure, a fleeting shadow slipping just beyond the treeline. "Is that Sam?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing again as the feeling of being watched intensified. "But we can't stay here." As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something moving through the fog, a dark shape, indistinct yet undeniably present. The whispers transformed into a maddening chorus, chanting our names in a haunting harmony. "We have to find a way out," Jake shouted, his voice breaking with fear. But as we stepped back into the trees, the forest shifted around us, every shadow stretching and twisting as if mocking our attempts to escape. "This way," I yelled, trying to lead us away from the ominous sound of our names echoing from the depths of the forest. But every turn felt wrong. The trees closed in tighter, branches reaching for us like skeletal fingers. "Please, just let's go back to the car," I pleaded, but the thought of Lisa and Sam lost in this nightmare paralyzed me with guilt. Then came another whisper, sharper this time, calling my name from the shadows, and I froze. "No, it's not real," I shouted, but the voice seemed to slip into my mind, pulling at my sanity. Just then, I felt Jake's grip on my arm tighten. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his eyes darting around nervously. I nodded slowly, realizing the sound was different now. A soft laughter creeping from behind the trees, echoing as if it were playing a sick game. Suddenly, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye again, a fleeting silhouette gliding through the trees. I turned to follow, but Jake pulled me back. "We can't split up," he said, his voice filled with panic. "We need to stick together." But before I could respond, a scream shattered the tense silence, a piercing sound that cut through the forest like a knife, and my heart sank. "That was Sam," I gasped, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. "We have to help him." We sprinted toward the sound, each step heavy with the realization that we were running deeper into the heart of the horror that lurked in the shadows. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, and I could feel the eyes of the forest upon us, every tree seemingly alive with malicious intent. We reached a clearing, panting heavily, and for a moment, everything fell silent. "Where are you, Sam?" I called, my voice trembling, but there was only the echo of my words, returning to me like a cruel joke. As I scanned the trees, I felt an oppressive weight settle in the air, and in that moment, I realized the forest had transformed, becoming a maze of torment. "We need to get out now," I urged Jake, the urgency in my voice igniting a spark of fear within him. But before we could move, a rustle broke the silence, and out from the shadows stepped Lisa. My heart leaped, but something was off. Her expression was blank, her eyes unfocused as she approached slowly. "Lisa!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. "Where were you?" But as she got closer, I noticed the chilling change in her demeanor. She didn't respond, just stood there, a puppet on strings, staring into the void. "What's wrong with her?" Jake asked, his voice trembling as he took a step back. "Lisa, are you okay?" Without warning, she raised a hand, pointing deep into the forest, her voice eerily calm. "They're waiting for you," she whispered, her words laced with something. As Lisa's words hung heavy in the air, a wave of dread washed over me, freezing my blood. "What do you mean, they're waiting for you?" I managed to choke out, but she merely stared past me, her eyes void of recognition, as if the forest had consumed her. Jake looked at me, panic etched on his face. "We have to go. We can't stay here," he urged, pulling me back from the creeping horror of her presence. Suddenly, from the depths of the forest came that haunting laughter again, echoing around us, swirling through the trees like a malevolent wind. It was the kind of laughter that burrowed deep into your mind, eroding sanity and leaving only fear in its wake. "Run!" I shouted, breaking the paralysis that had gripped us, and we bolted into the trees, ignoring the whispers that now seemed to call our names, taunting us with promises of oblivion. As we sprinted, the darkness pressed in closer, and I could hear the rustle of leaves behind us, the sensation of being pursued, though every time I dared to look back, there was nothing. It felt like the forest itself was alive, moving to trap us. "Where's Sam?" Jake shouted over the din of our pounding hearts. "We need to find him. We can't think about him right now," I gasped, but guilt washed over me like cold water. Every step I took felt like a betrayal. Then, ahead, I spotted a flicker of movement, someone staggering in the shadows. "Sam!" I called, relief flooding my chest. But as I pushed through the thick underbrush, the laughter rose to a crescendo, swallowing my shout. I stumbled into a small clearing and skidded to a halt, my heart sinking into my stomach. Sam lay on the ground, unconscious, his face pale and smeared with dirt. "Sam!" I rushed to his side, shaking him gently. "Wake up! We need to get out of here." I could feel the panic clawing at my throat, and as I checked for any signs of life, the laughter morphed into something more sinister. Shrieking voices mingling with a discordant melody that echoed through the trees, chilling me to the bone. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. I turned just in time to see Lisa standing at the edge of the clearing, but she looked different now. Her eyes were dark, void of any humanity, and her mouth twisted into a smile that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo that sent ice down my spine. "Get away from him," I shouted, rage mixing with fear as I stood protectively in front of Sam. But Lisa only giggled, her laughter sharp and echoing through the darkness, drawing forth shadows that danced behind her. "He's ours now," she hissed, and in that moment, I felt the forest shift around me, the trees closing in like a prison. "No!" I shouted, but before I could react, I felt a surge of energy pulse through the air, a sudden silence falling over the chaos. I glanced at Sam again. He was still motionless, and panic gripped me as I turned back toward Lisa. But she was gone, vanished into the shadows, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. "Jake!" I called out, desperation in my voice. But when I turned to find him, I saw only a dark shape flitting between the trees, his form swallowed by the night. "Jake!" I yelled again, but there was no response, only the whispers swirling around me, wrapping tighter like a noose. Realizing I was completely alone, a wave of despair washed over me, but I shook it off. I had to get Sam out. I hoisted him up, trying to rouse him as I felt the eyes of the forest upon me, the whispers urging me to give in. "Wake up, Sam. We need to go," I yelled, slapping his cheek lightly, and finally he groaned, stirring. "Wah, what happened?" he mumbled, his eyes fluttering open to meet mine. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived as I glanced around, the encroaching darkness feeling more threatening than ever. "We need to leave now," I urged, hoisting him up, and together we stumbled back toward the direction of the camp. As we moved, the whispers grew louder, weaving a tapestry of terror around us. The trees seemed to close in tighter, shadows flickering and darting just beyond the reach of our vision. "Where's Jake?" Sam asked, voice shaky, and my heart sank further. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, I didn't know. Every step felt heavier, the forest pushing against us, the laughter returning like a sinister lullaby. I could feel the dread creeping back, but I had to push it down. I had to keep moving for Sam's sake. "Just a little further," I whispered to myself, clinging to hope. Finally, we broke through the trees and stumbled into the clearing where the campsite should have been. but it was gone. Panic surged within me. "Noah, no. This can't be happening," I yelled, frantically scanning the area. But it was just an empty void, the ground littered with remnants of our abandoned campsite, swallowed whole by the forest. "Where is it?" Sam murmured, his voice trembling with fear. I turned to him, and in the flickering light of the dying sun, I saw the truth. There was no way out. "We have to go back," I said. But as I turned to face the trees again, the oppressive darkness loomed before us, an unfathomable abyss waiting to consume us. Just then, I felt it. A cold breath at my neck, sending shivers coursing down my spine. The laughter erupted all around us, a cruel symphony that danced with the shadows. "Stay close," I shouted, grabbing Sam's arm as we pressed deeper into the trees, the whispers amplifying with every step. We moved quickly, every rustle of leaves sounding like the footsteps of the forest closing in. The air grew thick with dread, and with it came the realization that we were being herded, trapped in a maze designed to keep us there forever. "There!" I cried, pointing to a faint glimmer in the distance, what looked like an old path barely visible through the underbrush. With no other options, we dashed toward it, the laughter echoing behind us like a warning. As we ran, I could feel the trees shift and sway, almost as if they were alive, closing ranks to keep us from escaping. We reached the path, and with one last surge of strength, I pulled Sam along, my heart racing with the urgency of survival. "Keep going," I urged, feeling the darkness press against us, a weight that threatened to crush my spirit. The laughter faded into the distance as we plunged down the path, and though I could still hear the whispers, they were now behind us, retreating as we fled. My heart pounded in my chest, desperation driving us forward until we broke free from the suffocating embrace of the trees. Finally, we emerged into the twilight, the forest's grip releasing us at last. We collapsed onto the soft grass of the clearing, breathless and shaking, staring back at the dense line of trees that seemed to sigh with defeat. We did it," Sam gasped, disbelief mingling with relief. But even as I caught my breath, I could feel the weight of the forest behind us, the whispers slowly fading yet leaving an unsettling feeling in my gut. I looked at Sam, and he nodded, understanding that the horror we had faced wasn't over. We had escaped the trees, but the forest was still there, a living entity filled with secrets and shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to claim its victims. We might have lived to tell the tale, but we both knew that something would always linger, haunting us long after the whispers faded into silence. We called the authorities right after, filing for 2 missing people. Not long after, we were both in for questioning, but we didn't have much to say, even though I think that the police suspected we did something. After a thorough investigation, there was a massive search party. Me and Sam both participated. A week went by, nothing. There was no sign they even went in from the beginning. And as we made our way back to civilization after the final hours of searching, I felt a cold weight settle in my heart, because in the depths of that forest, we had left our friends behind, and no amount of daylight could chase away the regret and guilt that would forever stay at the edges of our minds.